Welcome to the Deep Dive. You've sent us a fascinating interview, and well, our job is to pull out the crucial knowledge and insights for you. Today, we're plunging into a recent conversation with Bryan Johnson, widely known as the rejuvenation athlete, to understand his ambitious and, frankly, often talked about approach to longevity and optimizing his health.
Exactly. You shared the Bryan Johnson podcast from the More Plates, More Dates YouTube channel, and it's quite a source. Our mission today is really to explore Johnson's key ideas, from his blueprint protocol and the experimental therapies he's trying to his overarching views on aging and how to push back against it all directly from what he said in the interview.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Early on, Johnson discusses his move away from the term biohacker to rejuvenation athlete. What's the thinking behind that shift? Seems specific.
It's interesting, right? He felt the term biohacker had started to carry some maybe baggage, a sense of being on the fringe or maybe not serious enough. By calling himself a rejuvenation athlete, he's signaling a more serious performance-oriented approach to extending health and lifespan.
Performance-oriented. I like that framing.
And taking that a step further, he's actually created the Rejuvenation Olympics at rejuvenationolympics.com.
A rejuvenation Olympics. Wow, that sounds like a whole new level of competition. What's the idea there?
Well, the core idea is to create standardized, objective ways to measure how well someone is doing in their pursuit of longevity.
Right.
Like, how do you actually know if your efforts are paying off, right? He envisions this as a competitive field where participants on the leaderboard gain recognition within the community. It's all about making progress in longevity a measurable and, even competitive endeavor.
So how does someone even qualify for this rejuvenation Olympics? It's not about, like, lifting the most weight, I imagine.
That's right. No deadlifts required, probably. The entry requirements demonstrate a serious commitment, though. You need 3 qualifying measurements taken over a 6-month period. So it shows consistency.
6 months. Okay.
And the scale is already quite significant. The last update mentioned over 1,000 participants. So it's not just, a casual thing people are just dabbling in.
1,000 people measuring their aging speed. Wow. And what are these crucial measurements? What determines your ranking on this longevity leaderboard?
The primary metric is the speed of aging, specifically measured using True Diagnostics' Dudum Pace, 3rd-generation methylation clock.
Okay, Dudum Pace, methylation clock. Break that down a bit.
Right. So think of this clock as analyzing changes in your DNA's epigenetic markers. These are like switches that can turn genes on or off. Many scientists believe this can give us a more accurate picture of your biological age and how quickly you're aging at a molecular level rather than just, how many birthdays you've had.
So chronological versus biological age.
Exactly. So the goal on the leaderboard is to slow down or even reverse the rate at which this epigenetic clock advances.
Fascinating. So that's where he is now. But what led Bryan Johnson down this path? He wasn't always known for these super intense rejuvenation protocols. What's his background?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at his previous life. He was a very successful entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. Built and sold his company, Braintree Venmo, when he was relatively young.
Big success story there.
Huge. He talks about a shift in his identity, though, from being known within a specific tech circle to becoming a headline person, someone whose actions and ideas are quickly summarized, often, simplified, for a much wider audience.
I can imagine going from tech entrepreneur to the rejuvenation athlete definitely creates some, interesting headlines.
Oh, absolutely. He's basically come to terms with the fact that he'll likely be misunderstood by many. He realizes that trying to control public perception at that scale is just, losing battle.
So he just leans into it. Seems like it. And his intense focus on longevity actually grew out of a deep dive into understanding his own brain health first. He invested significantly in developing technology to measure brain function rigorously.
Wow. From fintech to brain tech to full body optimization. That's quite a journey. How did measuring his brain lead to this whole don't die philosophy?
Well, the rigorous process of measuring his brain apparently sparked a broader curiosity. If he was going to such lengths to understand and optimize his cognitive function, it naturally led him to ask, why not apply the same level of intensity to his entire body?
Makes sense in a way.
And this whole quest, which he distills down to the rather direct goal of don't die, has been about a decade in the making, he says. It's a singular focus he's arrived at after years of research and obviously a lot of self-experimentation.
Don't die. It's certainly to the point. Now, we kind of have to address one of those headlines that has definitely gotten people talking.
Yeah.
The penis injection. He discussed it in the interview, right? What was
Right.
his reasoning there? Yeah, he did. And it's interesting how he frames it. He's quite open about it, acknowledging the attention it received, but he positions it within his larger goal of addressing biological aging across all tissues and organs in the body. It wasn't isolated.
So it's not about, as some might assume, simply enhancing function in a specific area, like a quick fix.
Exactly. His perspective, at least as he presents it, is about getting to the root causes of age-related decline, rather than just treating the symptoms. He used the example of erectile dysfunction medications, suggesting that while they might offer a temporary solution, they don't actually reverse the underlying aging processes affecting that part of the body.
Hmm. Root cause versus symptom management.
Right. So his experimentation, including this particular intervention, is aimed at potentially achieving genuine rejuvenation at a biological level across the board.
Right, so it's all part of this very personal, very public N-01 experiment. Speaking of his methods, how does he approach these experiments, and what does he consider when it comes to the inherent risks involved?
He places a huge emphasis on controlling as many variables as possible in his daily routine. Things like maintaining a consistent bed temperature, sticking religiously to his diet. He understands the limitations of studying just himself, the N1 problem, but accepts that there will always be some degree of variability.
Can't control everything.
Exactly. When it comes to choosing therapies, his starting point is often looking at findings from peer-reviewed scientific papers on health span. That's the years you live in good health and lifespan, trying to replicate those findings.
He mentioned something called a power law game. What's the core idea behind that strategy?
Think of it as prioritization, basically. He focuses on those interventions that the scientific literature suggests have the most significant potential impact on extending health span and lifespan. The big hitters. If an intervention has weak evidence or maybe just a small potential effect, he generally won't invest his time and resources in it.
But does he stick strictly to that?
Well, he does acknowledge that he sometimes deviates from this for what he calls novel paths, things he finds particularly promising, or where the potential upside, even with less established evidence, seems really high to him. His work on thymus rejuvenation is a good example of that. It's challenging but potentially huge.
Okay, but then he ventures into areas like experimental research chemicals that haven't gone through the usual, FDA approval processes. How does he weigh that against his stated goal of don't die? Seems contradictory.
Yeah, that brings up the crucial question of risk assessment, doesn't it? He has a system for evaluating these compounds based on their existing safety data, the potential size of the effect reported in research, and interestingly, how easy they are to actually incorporate into his already complex protocol.
Ease of implementation matters.
Apparently so. He maintains very strongly that he would never knowingly compromise his safety. But he also acknowledges that his team's evaluation of risk might differ from more conventional medical perspectives. He used minoxidil, the hair loss treatment, as an example. They see the risks at his specific dosage as being quite low, even though others might raise an eyebrow.
It still seems like a fine line to walk prioritizing longevity while engaging in interventions that some might consider inherently risky or just totally unproven.
It does. What seems key from his description is the level of analysis his team conducts. They look very closely at the available data on dosage, potential side effects, and how to mitigate those risks. He also makes a clear distinction between cosmetic procedures and interventions aimed at actual regeneration.
Ah, okay. Regeneration versus just looking better.
Right. While he's not against cosmetic approaches, he says his primary focus right now is on therapies that could potentially reverse the biological processes of aging itself.
He talked about some specific interventions he's experimented with. Let's zoom in on those. HGH, for instance, human growth hormone. That's always a controversial one.
Yes, it is. He reported seeing a positive effect on his thymus gland, with imaging suggesting a significant rejuvenation about 7 years, he claimed. However, he also experienced notable side effects at his dosage of 1.8 IU, things like increased intracranial pressure, issues with glucose regulation, headaches, and disrupted sleep.
Not minor side effects.
No, definitely not. And based on that experience, he stated pretty clearly that he would not repeat that particular experiment. The risk-reward wasn't there for him.
Okay. What about rapamycin? That's another compound often discussed in the longevity research circles.
Right. His rapamycin protocol is informed by research in animal models. He carefully monitors his immune system and thymus markers after taking it to determine how long it stays in his system and what the effects are. He uses a specific coded formulation, likely Pfizer's Rapamune, which he noted is quite expensive, around $32 per milligram.
Wow,
Oh.
pricey.
Yeah. He follows a cyclical approach, using a higher dose initially, followed by slightly lower doses a few days later, and then monthly maintenance doses. It's quite structured.
And then there's the more cutting-edge stuff, like the follistatin gene therapy using mini circles. That sounds pretty advanced, maybe even sci-fi.
It really is. Their internal analysis of mouse studies ranked it quite high for potential lifespan extension, showing over a 30% increase in mice. So Johnson underwent this therapy. It uses these things called mini circles. You can think of them like temporary instructions given to your cells. They tell the cells to increase production of a specific protein, in this case, follistatin.
So it's not like permanent gene editing.
No, that's a key distinction he makes. It's about increasing production temporarily, not permanently altering your DNA. His follistatin levels reportedly increased significantly by 160%. He's currently waiting on MRI scans to assess changes in muscle and fat mass, and also further data on his speed of aging over a 6-month period post-therapy.
Any downsides observed so far?
Interestingly, he said that after 4 months, his blood work hasn't shown any negative changes in key pre-diabetic markers. Things like glucose, A1C, lipids, insulin remained unchanged, which is good because that could be a concern with things that boost muscle growth factors.
About the cost?
Yeah, the cost is substantial. Around $25,000 per shot, he mentioned, which, as the interviewer pointed out, definitely raises questions about accessibility and whether it will be a worthwhile investment for most people, even if it works.
$25,000 is, yeah, a significant investment. He also mentioned using young bone marrow mesenchymal stem cells. What's the story there?
Yes, that one ranked lower on their priority list, number 34, I think. It's primarily researched for its anti-inflammatory effects. They seem less certain about its benefits in individuals who are already healthy and don't have significant underlying inflammation. Is it adding anything or just, expensive?
Right, the stacking effect in healthy people is uncertain.
Exactly. He's also experimented with 17-alpha estradiol, which ranked quite high in their analysis, maybe 13th or 14th. And he continues to include metformin in his regimen, even though there's, ongoing debate in the scientific community about its broad use specifically for longevity in non-diabetics.
And peptides seem to be a part of his approach as well. Always hearing about peptides.
Correct. He follows a specific protocol apparently originating from Ukraine involving peptides like epitalon and thymosin beta 1 and 4. These are administered through a series of intramuscular injections over 5 days and then repeated every 6 months.
Any peptides he avoids.
He mentioned specifically avoiding CJC, one often used for growth hormone release, due to what he perceives as more uncertainty around its long-term safety profile. So still making risk calculations there.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about the Blueprint protocol itself and the products associated with it. What's the fundamental idea behind Blueprint as he presents it?
What's interesting is how he positions it. Johnson presents Blueprint as a genuine effort to understand how human intelligence, can best thrive. And this connects back to that overarching goal of don't die, not just for individuals, but maybe even for the human species as a whole. He sees it as a way to translate complex scientific findings into practical, actionable steps that an average person could actually take to improve their health and longevity.
So the Blueprint products then are designed to make it easier for people to adopt his core principles because the full protocol seems intense.
Exactly. He recognizes that the full, incredibly detailed protocol he follows is quite overwhelming and very time-consuming for most people. Let's be honest, probably impossible for most. So the Blueprint products are intended to simplify things, offering pre-formulated stacks, food products, tools to make implementation more manageable.
And the business side.
He's transparent about the fact that there's a financial aspect to these products, which is distinct from the open science nature of his own personal experimentation and data sharing. But he emphasizes their commitment to ensuring the quality and rigorous formulation of these products, trying to build trust there.
He also mentioned a large-scale study called BP 5000. What's the purpose of that initiative? Sounds ambitious.
It is. This is a significant undertaking aimed at gathering data from a large number of people, hopefully 5,000, who are using the Blueprint protocol or elements of it. They're collecting a wide range of data: body composition, blood work, responses to questionnaires, information from wearable devices, daily check-ins.
And what happens with that data?
The intention, he states, is for this to be an open science project. The data will eventually be shared to help the broader scientific community better understand the effects of the Blueprint approach on a larger population. not just on him.
With such a public and, let's say, unconventional approach, Bryan Johnson must face a fair amount of criticism and maybe skepticism. How does he address that in the interview?
He definitely acknowledges it. He mentions these sometimes unrealistic expectations people have about his physical appearance, given the sheer intensity and cost of his health regimen. Like, why doesn't he look 18?
Yeah, I've seen those comments.
Right. He even referenced a specific social media interaction. I think it was Elon Musk tweeting something critical, and his response was basically just, yep, acknowledging it without defensiveness. He claims to have a somewhat unusual attitude towards negative feedback, even saying he enjoys mean tweets, which is interesting.
Enjoys mean tweets. Yeah.
He stresses his commitment to being transparent and truthful about his methods and results, good or bad. Regarding the supplement line specifically, he reiterates that it was created primarily to make the core principles more accessible, responding to requests from people who found the full protocol just too daunting. He really tries to parse the project into the open science research aspect, his N1 data sharing, and the commercial side involving the blueprint products.
Okay, let's zoom out again. Based on all this extensive self-experimentation and the data he's collecting, what are some of his key insights into achieving longevity and optimal health, according to him?
Well, he reports achieving really impressive scores on key indicators of all-cause mortality risk. Things like very low levels of inflammation near zero. He claims a VO2 max in the top percentile for his age. Significant strength despite relatively light training, healthy scans of his brain and heart, and importantly, zero detectable arterial plaque.
Those are pretty significant markers.
They are. And his rate of aging, as measured by those third-generation biological age clocks we discussed, also suggests a significant slowing compared to the average person. He also highlights what he considers the 5 power laws for reaching a basic life expectancy of around 92 based on existing data.
What are those 5 power laws?
They're pretty standard public health messages, actually. Not smoking, engaging in regular exercise, following a diet, and maintaining a BMI similar to the Blueprint protocol, which is essentially whole foods, calorie-controlled, and consuming alcohol in moderation or not at all.
So the foundations are still key.
Absolutely. He believes that while supplements can play a supporting role, truly significant extensions in lifespan, like getting well past 100, will likely require more powerful interventions down the line, things like gene therapy. And he expresses optimism about a major breakthrough in human survivability happening within the next, say, 30 years.
Interesting. He also mentioned a detail about his own health history, something about being on thyroid medication for a long time.
Yes, that came up. He's actually been taking thyroid medication, both Synthroid and Armour Thyroid, since he was 21 years old. This was diagnosed after he returned from a trip to Ecuador.
Any known cause?
Apparently, the underlying cause wasn't autoimmune, which is common. His thyroid hormone levels are currently well managed with the medication. He doesn't have any plans to stop taking it, but he does acknowledge that it could be a confounding factor that influences some of his other health measurements. It's just part of his baseline now.
Right, another variable in the mix. There was one rather unconventional practice that the interviewer brought up towards the end, something about drinking urine for health benefits.
Yes, that was definitely an unexpected turn. The interviewer raised the topic, and Johnson seemed aware that some people advocate for this practice, urine therapy. They even played a brief audio clip of an individual describing their reasons for drinking their own urine, citing purported health and even diagnostic benefits.
And Johnson's reaction.
He offered a very brief, very neutral response, didn't really engage with it deeply, neither endorsing nor condemning it, just sort of acknowledged it as a thing some people do and moved on. Probably wise.
Probably wise, yeah. Okay, let's circle back to these biological age clocks because they seem so central to how he measures his progress and especially to the Rejuvenation Olympics. What's his deeper understanding or perspective on them?
He definitely views them as a significant scientific advancement. He cites a large body of research, over 1,200 publications. He mentioned supporting their validity in principle. He specifically points again to True Diagnostics' Dudem Pace Clock as a well-validated third-generation clock. He emphasizes that it has been shown to respond to interventions known to affect aging, like calorie restriction.
And his own experience using them.
He mentioned he himself has experimented with using 6 different biological age clocks simultaneously and found an average reduction in his epigenetic age across them. He sees companies like True Diagnostics as playing a crucial role in actually advancing the field and collaborating with researchers to improve the technology.
So if these clocks are so scientifically interesting, why aren't they the absolute gold standard for measuring actual health outcomes in, say, a clinical setting? Why rely on older markers too?
That's a really important distinction he makes, actually. While these clocks provide fascinating data about the rate of biological aging at a molecular level, they aren't yet definitively proven to directly predict long-term clinical outcomes like heart attacks or cancer risk in the same way that traditional health markers like cholesterol, blood pressure, or glucose might. The validation for outcomes is still ongoing.
Okay, so they're informative, but not yet fully predictive clinically.
Exactly.
Okay.
However, for something like the Rejuvenation Olympics, they offer some really practical advantages. Measuring phenotypic markers, which are more directly linked to current health status, often requires comprehensive blood draws, which can be a significant barrier for widespread participation cost, access, etc.
Right, a finger prick is easier.
Much easier. DNA methylation testing for these clocks can often be done with a simple finger prick, making it more accessible and less expensive for people to participate. Plus, Johnson also sees the competitive aspect of tracking your speed of aging as a motivating and kind of engaging element. A fun game, as he put it.
Gamification of longevity.
Precisely. He's observed his own biological age clock responding quite dynamically to specific interventions, like seeing it spike temporarily when he used HGH, and then seeing improvements after doing senolytic therapy to clear out old cells. So he sees them as responsive, at least.
But they aren't the main focus for the BP 5000 study.
Correct. He clarified that the BP 5000 study prioritizes more traditional, gold standard phenotypic markers. This is partly due to budgetary constraints. Running methylation clocks on 5,000 people repeatedly would be very expensive, but also because the study's main focus is on demonstrating the efficacy of the Blueprint protocol on established health metrics that doctors and scientists already trust. The clocks are interesting data points, but maybe not the primary proof point for efficacy just yet. He acknowledges the gamification aspect is cool, but also the risk of people overinterpreting the clock results before the science is fully mature.
This has been an incredibly comprehensive dive into, well, a huge amount of information from just one interview. To try and bring it all together, what are the key things our listeners should really take away from this deep dive into Bryan Johnson's world?
Yeah, we've definitely covered a vast landscape, haven't we? From his evolution into this rejuvenation athlete persona and his ambition to create a whole competitive framework for longevity with the Olympics, to the really detailed specifics of his personal self-experimentation, including some quite novel and, let's face it, debated therapies. We've looked at the methodology behind his Blueprint protocol, his reported experiences with various interventions, good and bad, and how he navigates the inevitable criticisms and skepticism that come with such a public and, boundary-pushing approach.
And that central tension.
This exactly. Throughout our discussion, I think a central theme really emerges, that constant interplay, maybe even tension, between trying to adhere to rigorous scientific principles and data and the undeniable allure of cutting-edge, sometimes less established experimental interventions in the relentless pursuit of extending health and lifespan.
Absolutely. So considering all that complexity and the varying degrees of evidence we've touched on, what's the final thought you'd leave our listener with today?
Well, this deep dive into Bryan Johnson's journey really highlights the intensely personal and continuously evolving nature of trying to optimize our health and extend our years of healthy living. Given the sheer volume of information, the costs involved, and the differing levels of scientific backing for the various approaches we've discussed today, maybe the question for the listener is, what aspects, if any, of Johnson's philosophy and methods resonate most with you? And perhaps more importantly, how might you apply a similar spirit of inquiry and data-driven thinking, even on a much smaller scale, within your own comfort zone and resources to your own personal health journey? Not necessarily about copying him, but maybe adopting some of that mindset.
That's a really thought-provoking question to end on. If you want to explore this further, we definitely encourage you to check out the original interview on the More Plates, More Dates YouTube channel, as well as the resources we've mentioned like rejuvenationolympics.com, True Diagnostics, and the Blueprint website itself. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.